This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations. Open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership. To live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome to another episode of the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horne. I'm absolutely delighted today to have as our guest, Jeff Pollack. He is a remarkable human being, a remarkable individual with whom I had the pleasure of meeting several months ago. And I think you'll find Jeff's story, his work, where he navigates employee diversity, sensitivity issues with modern approaches and brings decades of experience to this work. Jeff is President of Good-Bye Harassment, and he has also associated with Mintz Gold. I'll let Jeff talk more about what he does. Jeff, I'm so delighted to welcome you to the Authentic Change Podcast, and I'd like you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here. Well, I've been practicing labor and employment law for about 30 years at this point. In about 8 or 10 years, I started doing my own sexual harassment training for my clients. And about 5 years ago, I decided to make my own online training videos. And the thing that I think sets our videos apart is we distinguish between things that are illegal and things that are against company policy. And we train about both of those things, but it's a critical distinction so employees understand that they can't really sue a company based on company policy, as opposed they can sue based on something that's illegal discrimination.
Yeah, Jeff, that is so fascinating. What brought you to start this business? What prompted you to do that?
So I, for many, many years, used to refer all my training out to somebody, and my clients were complaining about him. They didn't like his style. And at one point, one of our very large clients called me and told me they wanted me to do the training myself. So for the next year and a half, I spent traveling around the country. I trained over 10,000 employees. And during that same time frame, on behalf of a lot of my clients, I had reviewed the available video training out there, and I just did not like any of it. It all seemed canned to me, not at all enjoyable, and just not very informative. And I decided to do my own training videos, and I brought in an actual working director, working actor, and it's not really your typical training video. It's enjoyable to watch, and as I said, it draws that distinction. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, so I think it's a good product.
Oh, that's great, Jeff. And I'm curious about this distinction between what's a topic that's illegal and what's a matter of policy. As I think about authenticity, it comes up as well, right? Like, can I really be myself at work? And I'm just wondering how we play around with those ideas, how we think about those ideas. A lot of times, having led HR teams around the globe, having started a career in labor and employee relations, I'm often aware that people may not like certain things that happen, that result, that are a consequence of certain actions, but they're not illegal. And sometimes that's a difficult bridge, a difficult divide for people to move forward to understand that, right? That, perhaps as long as it's not because of your race, your sexual orientation, your gender, right, your national origin, your religious preferences, your rights to organize. A lot of stuff happens that we don't like in the workplace.
That's correct.
That's not illegal. So how do you talk with people about that, Jeff?
So, the example I use is the boss that yells for no reason at all. The boss that just always is miserable. And I often refer to that person as the equal opportunity offender. Sometimes I use a different word in place of offender, equal opportunity blank.
Right.
That person, as long as they're just miserable and they're not targeting any particular trait or class, they're not discriminating against them. Now, I always say, but we don't want that happening. So you can
Right.
go to HR and you can know that we're going to talk to that supervisor and we're going to tell that supervisor you can't treat your employees that way, but you can't sue the company because it's not illegal. As opposed to the supervisor who's only yells at women or only yells at, Spanish people. That is something that's potentially illegal.
Yes, that's a great point. And I often, I tell people sometimes there are authentic jerks in the world because people ask me about authenticity, right? And what is authenticity and how do I work and live more authentically? And, often we come to a situation that we can say that there are people, perhaps it requires a certain set of humanistic values for authenticity in the way that I describe it. But I think the word allows for a wide range of human emotions. So what it goes back to is, what are the values that are important?
So you have to be aware that you're not the only person in the workplace. There's people that are of all different backgrounds and all different sensitivities. And we might have talked about this last time we spoke, Mike, what I call the mother-daughter test.
No, really we haven't, simple. Jeff. I'd love you to share that. Yes, please.
So it's a phrase that I came up with years ago, even before I started doing training, just in interactions with my clients. And it's really simple. If you would not want somebody doing something to your mother or daughter where they work, don't do it to somebody else's mother or daughter where you work, or father, son, brother. It's almost a foolproof test. And I will just going on to the authenticity part of it. So at one of my trainings, I had a gentleman say to me, I like to hold the door open in the morning for the ladies and say, "Good morning, beautiful." Is that a problem? And he wasn't being sexual, and he was genuinely trying to be nice. And I said,
it was cultural for him and something.
Don't just say good morning. Don't throw in the beautiful part, because you might not like it if every morning somebody told your daughter they looked at beautiful work. So it's just a matter of being tuned in to everybody else's culture, everybody else's values.
Wow. And that's great, because I think that's certainly what an authentic leader does. An authentic leader is as willing to be influenced by his or her teammates as he or she is willing, or they are, to influence them. So when I think about authenticity, Jeff, I think about congruence. Authenticity is when our words and our actions align. Better yet, when our thoughts, words, and actions align. We have attitudinal, behavioral, and cognitive congruence. And generally, when people are authentic, when they're in this congruent state, they're generally happy. Do you find that, what scales get out of balance in employee and labor relations issues in the workplace? How do things get out of whack for people? Arising from our differences would be one, I imagine.
Well, I don't know how long your podcast is, but we can talk about that question for many hours. How do things get unhappy? But one of the things I always tell managers and HRs is people want to be heard. People want to be heard. Listen to what they have to say. Not every idea is going to be a great one, but listen to them as if it's the potential to have a great one, because once in a while, they are going to have a great one. If you're just there and you're not giving the short shrift to the employees and you generally are listening to them, a lot of the problems will be nipped in the bud. I think that a lot of employee-employer relationship is psychology. And I'm not a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but it's general human interactions.
Right. I think there's so much to your point that people do want to be heard, and often creating the opportunity as a manager for someone to be heard takes a lot less time than all of the aftermath that follows when a person doesn't feel heard. Is that your experience too, Jeff?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's much more of a listening on the part when I'll call him the subordinate or her the subordinate. There's much more listening on the subordinate's part when they think the manager's actually listening to them.
Wow, that's a great observation, that that act of listening really creates a multiplicative effect. I mean, when it tunes it up for everybody else in the situation or in the environment. Jeff, how do we employee and labor relations issues are often challenging, time-consuming, and difficult, and they pair people and parties against one another. And I think it's often that people are, acting out of what they believe. They don't intend to do harm. And situations, though, get polarized, right? That I see right and I see left, and I can't see in between. How do you help people in those situations when their interests seem so disparate that they'll never come together? Can people do that?
So let me just distinguish between types of disputes. You have disputes which I'll put into economic. How much I'm getting paid? Am I getting paid overtime? Am I getting paid enough? Then I'll have the disputes where I'll call discrimination, for lack of a better word. Those are much harder to resolve because it's not just I could pay you $12 more, I can pay you $14 more. There's a lot of emotion involved in them. And when you start tagging people with labels, it becomes very difficult. I have advised young attorneys, young plaintiffs' attorneys on numerous times, don't name an individual defendant in the lawsuit, in a discrimination lawsuit. Because when you do that, it makes my job so much harder to settle a case because the person whose name doesn't care about the money. The person whose name's in there cares that they've been called a discriminator in a lawsuit. So I've advised young plaintiffs' attorneys, and several of them have come back to thank me about that. But going back to the question is, I also am a mediator. And part of the thing is getting people to understand their common goal. And look, we could hold on to disputes forever, but at the end of the day, in labor relations, if you're going to keep working together, whether it be management and labor or whether it be an employer and a direct employee, if you're going to keep working together, you got to get past what's blocking you. And not everybody gets what everybody wants. That's what I say the definition of compromise is. Both sides are equally unhappy. Everybody's got to give a little in order to get a little.
Yeah, and so much of that depends, I imagine, on how people see fact patterns. And often, facts are in the eyes of the beholder sometimes. And it may be difficult to arrive at a common factual understanding. In some of these circumstances, I imagine that you raise, for example, in an economic dispute around overtime, depending on what systems exist, there may be documentation to help in that regard. And yet that can still be challenged. So how do you really begin to, provide that orientation? I mean, a practical orientation to people about the world of work and our challenges that are in it. You offer a framework, I think, that is so compelling about we all don't get what we want. And yet I think you still operate out of an abundance mentality. I mean, you're still an individual who believes in open, honest communication. And you would steer away from guarded and cautious communication. Of course, unless you're, trying to protect interests in a dispute between and among people. But I'm curious about how you see those topics.
At the end of the day, we're all human. We all got what I'll call quirks, for lack of a better word. And those quirks come with us to the job. Those quirks go with us everywhere. A lot of it is just opening the lines of communication. And, you said often there's a dispute or a disagreement on the facts. Oftentimes, if it's just you can sit with people in the room and explain the facts, sometimes they get it. And sometimes the employee explains the facts to the employer, and the employer gets it. So rather than getting up your guard immediately and getting ready for battle, you can always have a battle, but you can always try to avoid the battle.
It seems that in so many labor relations and employee relations contexts, I mean, we operate out of roles. I remember being an employee relations manager early in my career in a unionized environment. And it seemed that for grievance handling, that there was a certain pattern and a certain rhythm that was expected by all the parties to the process about what got raised, what was the level of severity of the issue. And as long as people followed these roles that they ascribed to themselves and that were part of that process, things seemed to work pretty smoothly. But I'm wondering, how do you create those kinds of conditions in heated circumstances? You're skilled at doing this. I believe that. How do you create the kinds of circumstances and the kinds of conditions that people can have open and honest communication?
It takes a lot of work. You have to affirmatively do it every day. Every situation you're in, you've got to affirmatively do it. Now, you know what? Sometimes there's an emotional reaction, but you can always back away from the emotional reaction an hour later, email the person and say, you know what? Let's sit down tomorrow. Let's sit down on Monday when things have calmed down and we'll talk about the facts. You don't have to. Some people tend to always have to back into and support their first immediate reaction. It's okay to change your position.
Boy, that's such great advice. And that change often becomes, I guess in some circumstances, that change happens because of regret. Oh my gosh, I really regretted, whatever action I took. Another reason it might change is because on reflection, a person understands someone else's point of view in a way that they were unable to see or hear in the past. Are there certain, Jeff, triggers in the Zoom environment? Workplaces are all different today, right? We have plenty of people who are at work, whether they're in restaurants or research associates in scientific corporations, people who are working at labs. But do disputes arise as frequently? I mean, in Zoom mediated environments? I mean, what's your thought on that? Do you see less or more when we're physically apart?
Well, I could tell you personally, from my experience over the past year and a half, definitely less.
Yes.
There are the occasional stories you hear on Zoom. Even, we have a weekly team meeting at my firm where we go over the calendar, and you get 30 people on a Zoom, and people sort of lose that edge, that caution, and I immediately cut it off. But generally, I've had a lot less complaints about people being on Zoom than when we were together. And let me just go back to something you had said about one of the reasons why you might change your mind also is that in the immediate reaction, I might not think about that I had a similar case a year ago. And then after we have the heated discussion, I hang up that afternoon and I remember, you know what? A year and a half ago, a different employee came to me with a similar situation. Let me see what happened in that situation. Then you go back and you check your file, and you know what? You always want to be consistent. You never want to have different rules applying to different people. That's how you get yourself in trouble. So if you realize that this situation has come up before, even if it's especially come up multiple times, you want to be consistent. So then you go to the employee, however you do it. If you want to be modest about it, you want to be bravado. The point is, don't dig into a position that's wrong.
Yes, when I'm working with individuals and when I'm working with groups or two people, maybe a two-person conflict, I often try to figure out where is the source of discord? Where is the source of disagreement? Is it over the goals for a particular project? Is it over methods or processes? Or is it over values? And sometimes just getting clear about where the discord lies provides an avenue or a pathway or a flight path to change.
Sometimes there's a value to a neutral. And as I said, I'm a mediator. Sometimes the personalities we've been in these trenches so long that we just can't say it to each other. We can't agree that the grass is green. Sometimes it just takes that neutral, and that neutral can be the HR manager, that neutral can be somebody else to say, guys, let me just review the facts to you. Let me just go over it. And sometimes just that third party, that neutral, hearing it from somebody else's voice. The facts haven't changed. The positions haven't changed, but it's being presented by somebody else. Sometimes that's enough to get you over the hurdle.
Such a great point is just to have helpers, coaches, attorneys, consultants in employee and labor relations. So often, so important to have a third-party perspective who can step back without backing up and really continue to represent the interests for which they are engaged and for the justice they want to achieve. And that is often at the hearts of the desires of many. Jeff, as I think about this, it raises some great points. Often when I'm in these factual disputes with people, trying to sort through values or processes or goals, another way that I often help people is to look up, is to say, what do we have in common? What is our common interest? And sometimes it's difficult. You really have to go all the way out to an external paying customer. But I'm wondering if in these dispute-filled environments in which you work on communication. That sounds great. You bring a perspective to the situation. What other techniques or ways or methods might help in those circumstances where people are really almost at war with each other?
Well, you want to focus on everybody's goals and why those goals, and actually examining those goals, because sometimes they haven't even thought their goals through. And when you start to run that out, they realize, you know what, maybe I don't need X, maybe I need half of X and a little bit of Y. Mm-hmm. And it also depends on whether you're talking about in a situation with a current employee or a former employee. Because when you're talking about a former employee, really the employee, very different and almost divergent goals, unless there are non-competes and trade secrets involved. It's almost I never want to see you again, let me get away, as opposed to I still have a job and I still have to come in tomorrow and work with the same team and the same coworkers and the same managers. But what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Sometimes employees come in and what they really want to accomplish is they want another job. They're never going to be happy no matter what change. Sometimes employees just, they're not clicking at that position, and maybe if they were in another position, they'd be much better off. Or maybe there's some type of, I hate to use the word accommodation because that's not the word I'm trying to like, but some type of adjustment that would let them perform even better.
Jeff,
and I think we've all sort of learned about that in the last year and a half on Zoom is a perfect example.
And Jeff, what's amazing is that you convey a sense of a unique identity, of a person of a whole cloth. How do you bring your authentic self into these situations? It's got to be challenging at times.
Sometimes I'm a little too, I'm a little too unfiltered. And my clients, luckily, bear with me. I sometimes don't have enough filters, and I'm a little too authentic and sharing really what I think it is.
Yeah.
That's just my general approach to life. And I just, if you don't have a lot of, I don't know if I can use the words here, but that kind of stuff, it's a lot easier to deal with situations when you don't have a lot of bull stuff.
Right.
Bull
yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah. You have a stake. You take an interest in you take a stake in the situations in which you're involved.
It's funny. So as a mediator, when I went through my mediation training, the mediator who trained us said, I will never, ever, ever give up on a case. I will work it for weeks. I will keep calling. And then there are other mediators who are like, oh, you know what? It's 12 o'clock. We're done. And those people don't have a stake in it. Those people are just there to check the box and say, move on. Like you said, having a personal stake in it, being able to identify with the parties, see each other's positions, makes a big difference.
I was trained as a mediator in the DC Superior Court program. They ran a open door, multi-door program for disputants as a way of preventing further interaction with the legal system or with the courts. And it is always challenging to bring who you are to those circumstances and to step aside as well so that the parties can really hammer out their disputes. And I think you're so right. You have to feel a sense of commitment and involvement to a process that you can improve in order to assist and to help your clients and the greater good.
So there's one of the, top mediators in New York, if not the country. He has no airs. He comes and he tells you just how he feels. There's no formality. He comes in, he tells you, I'm going to tell you how it is going to be. And he's almost the definition of being authentic in there. Now, sometimes, when you're dealing with the parties, you have to tone that down a little bit. But, in general, if you're not believed by the parties, if you're not believed in general, you're not going to be able to function that way. You have to be able to have credibility in order to serve that function.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking. And is that the act of leadership? I'm trying to think about how do we relate this topic of leadership and effective employee relations and effective management of disputes in the workplace?
So one of the things I was thinking as we've been talking is people, I don't know, often, sometimes say to me, HR is not there on my side. HR is only there to protect the company. And I disagree. To a certain extent, they are, but they are there to help you. And they are there. There's a reason they're called human resources. You can be a resource. The problem is, a lot of employees see them as the adversary as opposed to being on the team together. And if we could get that mindset to change, I think that's a big step.
Jeff, it's just fascinating the work that you do and how you convey a sense of identity and bring presence to a situation. In many ways, I often talk about the gifts of presence, being present, bringing hope to a situation, and knowing and discernment, knowing what's work and what's not work. And it seems that you bring many of those aspirations, those qualities to a situation. And it makes me think that folks who want to lead authentically, folks who are leading authentically in their organizations, could benefit in contested or difficult employee situations from conversation or involvement with a person like you. So how would people get in touch with you? How would members of our audience get in touch with you?
They can email me at pollack@mintzandgold.com. That's POLLACK at MINTZANDGOLD.com. Or if you go on my website, Good-Bye Harassment, and you click the contact tab, that will ultimately get to me.
And all one word, goodbyeharassment.com?
www.goodbyeharassment.com, all one word.
And the other way is at Pollack at mintzandgold.com.
Correct. And that phone number at Mintz Gold, if you want to go old school and use the phone, 212-696-4848.
That's great. Jeff, if you were going to give one piece of advice to people who want to engage authentically, particularly in contested environments, what would you encourage?
Presence and awareness. I'm sorry if that's two words.
Oh, that's great. No, yeah.
Presence and awareness.
And presence, I understand. It's that active engagement. Tell me about awareness a little bit.
Awareness of every word you say, everything you do has some type of cause and effect.
Yes.
That cause and effect may be immediate. That cause and effect may be next year. But just be aware. Life is a big chess game. And so everything you do, there's going to be some type of reaction to what you do or don't do.
We talk about that so much in authentic leadership, this idea of self-awareness and having,
Exactly.
having an idea of who you are if you want to lead others. And that's just great. I mean, these concepts, Jeff, that you bring around presence and awareness, and people can talk more with you about those ideas by getting in touch with you at Pollack at Mintz and Gold.com, or by looking at goodbyeharassment.com and get in touch with you to talk about those issues. Give that phone number once again, please.
It's 212-696-4848.
Oh, that's great.
One thing I would just add for the management side listeners out there is I always encourage clients to call first. Call first, ask the question, and it's a lot easier for me to guide you to do it right than to try to undo something that's done wrong. So always call and ask the question.
So consistent with what, the advice I often give to our clients as well, is ask a question. And what you're saying is, ask a question to the expert if you have a doubt, or, get that perspective that may help you shape an opinion and form positive action as opposed to create some negative energy. Jeff, it's been an absolute delight to have you as a guest on Authentic Change. And I really appreciate all of the great work that you're doing in the world to grow inclusion, to celebrate our diversity, and to have a more just and equitable workplaces. Jeff, thank you for all the work that you're doing in that regard. It's been a pleasure and a delight to have you on this episode of the Authentic Change podcast.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Great. And for our listeners, stay well until our next edition. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.